global humanitarian system was put under immense pressure, and which has inevitably uncovered its shortcomings. And one can argue that the knowledge that we have today of the system's shortcomings will help us determine what we can do next and how we can be better prepared in the future in case any challenges arise. So we're here today to discuss with our distinguished expert the shape of the humanitarian system and the post-pandemic and what the future holds for it. So Mr. Saba, and I know that I've mentioned just now that our main focus is the humanitarian system post-pandemic, but to better understand and to set the scene for everyone, can you give us a brief idea how the state of the humanitarian system was preceding the pandemic and what issues did the pandemic exacerbate?
Thank you, first of all, for this invitation. And thanks for your introduction about myself. Honestly speaking, I believe that are really much more than 30 years. I started in 1985, my international experience in Somalia with the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and later on I worked for the United Nations up to the 2013, almost 10 years ago. I retired from there. Then in 2017, I had the honor of being appointed for managing the Dubai International Humanitarian City, which, as you know, is the largest humanitarian hub in the world. Why I'm saying this? Because I'm going to start exactly, you mentioned about generosity during the pandemic and so on. What I can tell you is that probably I'm one of the best witnesses into this room about the generosity of UAE. First of all, do not forget that UAE provided support to many countries. I'm talking about bilateral assistance. I remember honestly an aircraft landing in Rome, coming from UAE, assisting the Italian population exactly with goods, because in that period everybody was desperate in looking for personal protection equipment and so on. This is something that was really the amazing response from UAE. On the other side, UAE, and I'm the witness also of this part, on the multilateral assistance provided us, which means the humanitarian community of IHC, with a very strong support. I'm talking about military aircrafts which were made available because the supply chain was totally collapsed. So starting from the word of generosity, for sure, UAE represents and expresses in the best manner the generosity worldwide. That is my introduction to the topic of that you put and you focus on the post-pandemic. I have a question, but really we are already in a post-pandemic situation. I have some doubts. All of you are wearing masks. My too. I have my mask with me. Means that we are not absolutely in a post-pandemic. We are still in a pandemic situation. That is my humble opinion. At least this is what we are doing. We are regularly checking ourselves with tests. We are regularly proceeding with our vaccination plans. We are dispatching, at least from IHC, still quite a lot of medicines, medical supplies for the pandemic situation. But let me go back, otherwise it's appear that I don't want to respond to the question. Now, the difference between the previous situation and the post-2020, well, let's just say that we have quite a lot of lessons learned, and we have to be extremely careful. You are a research entity, but what I can tell you is that frequently, especially in the humanitarian sector, the lessons learned are very good research which are going into a drawer and then forgetting totally. Why I'm saying this? Try to think that a few years before the pandemic of COVID-19, we had Ebola in West Africa, which was not peanuts, honestly. Some 10 years before, we had the avian flu. And we did quite a lot of preparedness about the avian flu. Means that we were ready to respond most probably for an epidemic situation, but not for a pandemic situation. Means that if I should remember the words of Bill Gates, who invested quite a lot as Bill Gates and Melinda Foundation, they invested quite a lot in the preparedness for a pandemic situation. Well, I'm still surprised on the conditions that we found ourselves when the pandemic came. And as you remember, originally, the pandemic was a Chinese problem, then became a Korean problem, then a Japanese problem, and then an Italian problem, and then step by step involved almost the entire world. This is how is the bizarre aspect on the preparedness, which was the situation before. Well, the humanitarian community has been always struggling with the funds. And I'm, of course, my best, let me say, position as observer is in the emergency preparedness and response. But if I should look even into the development projects, well, even the development was struggling with the funding. Why? Because the emergencies are absorbing in a very crazy manner quite a lot of funds. And today we are still calling some emergencies, we continue to call them natural disasters, when we know extremely well that they are due to climate change. And then climate change is a natural disaster or is a sort of man-made contribution disaster. That is the point. But anyway, what changed quite a lot. The pandemic impacted the full humanitarian action. If you look at what's happened during the pandemic, the private sector exploded because it was in the desire of assisting the population in need. The private sector has been one of the main actors, in my opinion, supporting the humanitarian community. So the humanitarian field started in being populated by several actors, which in the past they were acting in a different manner. Before COVID, we were able to knock the doors of some companies and to get a nice, relevant check signed. And that's what they used to do, funding, providing funding. Today, the companies, the private sector, want to be part of the humanitarian action, are not anymore just passive donor. They are becoming a very proactive people. They want to be part. I witnessed some initiatives, and I believe, sorry for mentioning those that are familiar with me, but I'm pretty sure that in Abu Dhabi happened the same. For example, when the situation became worse in India, I got the offer from the Emirates Airline making available a portion of their own bellies into the passengers aircraft, which are relevant quantities for flying into 10 different cities in India. I can mention quite a lot of examples, but this is exactly how the humanitarian action has been impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. COVID substantially involved everybody, regardless, let's say, the money that you have in your bank account or in your pocket. COVID involved, let's say, any age of people, and this is something that created a sort of glue by taking care of each other. You were mentioning the word Humanitarian Day. This is the message of the World Humanitarian Day, substantially taking care about the others. The World Humanitarian Day, the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, as well as Martin Griffith, the Undersecretary General for OCHA, are inviting us to reflect and to celebrate also those humanitarian workers that are operating in the field within the community which have been affected by the disaster or by any other dramatic situation. And trust me, when I saw the title, the topic of the year, I said, those are simply the basic of the action that we need to take whenever there is an emergency. It's not, let me say, anybody of us going into the field, into the affected area, coming from 3,000, 4,000 kilometers far, which are going to save life. Who's going to save life is the community that is seated there. This is the game that happened in any disaster. This is what's happened, of course, also during the pandemic. However, the reciprocal support here is the key of the today's solution. So, bottom line, the change is there. There is an impact, there is a clear impact, and we have to start looking into the lessons learned. We have quite a lot of lessons learned even into IHC, and this is something that we have to make available because we need to look careful for preparing ourselves, not only for the next pandemic, but in general for the humanitarian response. This is impacting dramatically also the development today. And the development is something that, in terms of sustainability, we have to reflect carefully. Now, for you, it's a sort of habit to enter from June up to August, September, with temperatures that are going up in a very extraordinary manner. I don't know how many of you have been in Europe in the past few months, but in Europe, temperatures went up to the 40s. Rivers are totally dry, and this is something that is a clear signal there is an emergency which it appears that many are ignoring, but this is another part of the drama that we have to keep in mind when we talk about humanitarian action. And finally, I'm going to close. It's not, because we were not enough, most probably in trouble. We have a conflict which is absorbing today another huge amount of money which potentially was destined to, let me say, to the development more than emergency. That is the reason why I was saying emergencies, unfortunately, are eating quite a lot of funds, and more and more we are jeopardizing the development.
Thank you, Mr. Saba. Which leads me to my next question that addresses the lessons learned and what we can do about them. From your perspective, do we need to see a systemic change in the global humanitarian system? And if so, in what ways do you see it happening? Because you just mentioned, for instance, that the pandemic has forced everyone to get involved. That's including the private sector. So do we need to bridge the gap between the private sector and the NGOs, the public humanitarian entities? Is that one way to go around causing a change in the global humanitarian system?
We need to work on preparedness. Again, where I have to start from the preparedness, from the local community, first of all. If the local community is ready, okay, and prepared, means that they are going to be, let me say, those people that are really saving life. Then, according to the dimension of the emergency, the size of the emergency, then most probably we need somebody else's help. And this somebody else cannot be anymore just the UN system. Honestly speaking, again, even the UN has to look internally and to somehow jump into a more, let me say, coordination among themselves. They need, many years ago, they started with a definition of one UN. One UN means that all the agencies are working together because in front of them they have a clearly beneficiary. Okay? We need to push, we need to encourage the UN to continue on this road in order to work together as one UN. Because otherwise we risk duplications, because otherwise the funds are not anymore enough, because we need especially to convince the civil society to partner with them and to get their own support and to get them not behind us but together with us in the field in order to assist the population in need. Now, in terms of lessons learned, this is, in my opinion, one of those lessons learned, to look together, okay, how to prepare better ourselves. What I can tell you, for example, from the international humanitarian city perspective, the health stocks growth from $4 million, $5 million, which I registered in 2017, to an average of 50, 60, $70 million in 2020, 2021. What does it mean? This is a huge impact on the infrastructures, first of all, because it means an increased requirement of temperature control. You have to modify totally your cold chain because we are talking about medicines, medical supplies, and so on. But you need also to jump into another level for a professional management of those stocks. And together with WHO, we are exploring in order to set quickly, if it's possible, a center of excellence for health logistics. This is something that is a must. There is no choice because we need to be prepared for the next pandemic too. We cannot absolutely think that we are not going to be ready next time. So, but there is even an issue related to the supply chain because the supply chain was totally collapsed, totally disrupted. If you consider that, just for your info, more or less the 80, in between 90% of the relief items are manufactured in Southeast Asia. It's not incidentally that the largest humanitarian hub is in UAE because we are extremely close to Southeast Asia. So in terms of import, it's less costly than to bring in other parts. But some of the items in particular were produced in China, which means that the first country affected by the COVID-19 was the main manufacturers of many items, including our masks. And this is where many countries decided to convert some of the companies in order to produce immediately masks. So it means that whatever doesn't create a huge profit substantially is produced in Southeast Asia or in countries where so if we want to be prepared, we have to think about also this component. As a lessons learned, the same COVID-19 pandemic impacted even the strategy of IHC, which has been approved recently a few months ago by our board. And what we intend to do is that we intend to open a dialogue with all the humanitarian hubs which are hosting stocks for international humanitarian response worldwide in order to support each other, to discuss each other in terms of solutions, to look together how can we really, let me say, of support at regional level. We signed an agreement with the Panamanian government because there is an hub in Panama, but I can tell you that we have also an agreement with the Italian government because there is another humanitarian hub in Italy, but we mapped totally between 10, 11 relevant hubs worldwide. And we intend to work together because this is how we can really support people in need or countries affected by disaster. And the difference between, let me say, what I did in the past, you mentioned the UNHRD, which is a purely UN system. What we are trying to do from Dubai is to get around the table governments discussing together on how to support the humanitarian community. This is a big difference in terms of approach because we are involving also the private sector. I signed an agreement also with Trends. So this is how we intend to proceed because you cannot absolutely avoid that other actors must be part of the humanitarian action today. This is not anymore an issue of getting the professionals of the humanitarian action. Anybody can be the professional of the humanitarian action.
Thank you so much, Mr. Saba. That was very informative. Um, I would go back to you mentioning the civil society organization, and I'd like to hear from you, I guess, your evaluation of the role they played during the pandemic, and what do you think, from your point of view, that they could have done better?
Well, what could be done better? This is something that, you know, it's a very huge question, in the sense that, honestly speaking, in my long career, I never seen the private sector knocking the door, just asking, how can we help the humanitarian community? Because for all the previous years, it was the humanitarian community knocking the door of the private sector and asking them, could you please help us? And if I should look in the past 18 months, what I can tell you is that I got companies knocking my door and asking exactly how we can help the humanitarian community. Logistics companies, manufacturers, and so on. The universities, guys, this is the must, because whatever I intend to do, okay, I need the academia with me. Now, I was talking before about the Center of Excellence for Health Logistics. This is something where the academia has to play its own role. I can tell you the Wollongong University, the Mohammed bin Rashid School of Initiatives, I don't know if I'm forgetting somebody else, the CUNY University, which is expression of Kuehne+Nagel Foundation. So there is quite a lot of movement within the academic institutions, within the private sector, and even with the governments. Because the agreement which we are able to sign with the government of Panama, with the government of Italy, and other governments, because we intend, that is where, let me say, government and private sector, as well as the academic institutions, can work together. If I should show you just a picture which is, let me say, representing our ecosystem, what is happening within the international humanitarian city is that, yes, we have a good number of humanitarian organizations, UN agencies, international organizations, and so on. But we have also some companies which are purely manufacturers of humanitarian aid, or are logistics companies, and so on. Try to imagine we have a total of 500 people, more or less, working within the city. If I should take the humanitarians, most probably they don't have, of course, my 37, 40 years of experience, but let me give them 10 years of experience multiplied by 500 people, we are talking about 5,000 years of experience. Now, if I should take this knowledge and asking my colleagues to start discussing their own challenges in the field, together with the commercial companies, with the manufacturers, together they can find the solutions. If I should take that expertise, and I'm going to share that expertise with the young entrepreneurs or young students who intend to embrace the life as a humanitarian worker, and do not forget, most probably within them we have the future humanitarian leaders, then I believe that I did my job. If I'm not able to put together exactly the commercial companies, the private sector, the universities, government, then I risk to fail. This is, in my opinion, how we should look into the future. That is the point. We need to build up the new generation of the humanitarian workers and the humanitarian leaders. We are too old, at least myself. I'm done.
You brought a lot of technical terms, and I am very interested in your expertise as a humanitarian in humanitarian logistics. So, for a lot of us who don't really know what goes behind the scenes, can you give us an insight into the day-to-day logistics and, I guess, material circulation of supplies? That's my first part of the question. The second part is, I know that the pandemic has severely disrupted the supply chain and these functions and these procedures. So how can we ensure that it remains secure and it preserves its resilience during such times?
Well, I mentioned it before, just with the example of the masks, that many companies, let me say, decided to convert part of their production into masks. This is part of the resilience, in my opinion. But if I should look, especially in UAE, is most probably one of the best places where we can encourage the consolidation of the supply chain system. Now, UAE is hosting the largest humanitarian hub in the world. If you open our humanitarian logistics data bank, you will see that we have an average of $140 million of stocks which are seated within IHC, with a turnover which is almost another $120 million per year. So means that there is a good rotation. Now, if we should have the possibility of encouraging some manufacturers, for example, to produce locally, I believe that it makes sense. And this is how we can somehow ensure that we can grant a good portion of the humanitarian relief items. Let me give you a point here. The reason why Dubai International Humanitarian City became the largest humanitarian hub in the world has nothing to do with the tallest, let me say, building in the world, in the sense that to build up a very huge tower is it's really a very iconic building, the Burj Khalifa, there is no doubt. But the reason why IHC became the largest humanitarian hub is because the humanitarian community decided to elect home in UAE. And the reason behind is quite simple. If you look geographically, our position in UAE, we are able to reach 2/3 of the world population in a few hours flight. That is the reason why the humanitarian community decided to elect home in UAE. And this is the reason why I'm convinced that now we have to encourage the commercial company, the manufacturers, to increase a certain production within UAE for supporting exactly the preposition of the humanitarian aid. And this is the unique combination worldwide. If you look, there is no other humanitarian hub which decided to collocate together humanitarians and manufacturers and commercial companies. trust me, this is something that you have to take for good. I'm the one who most probably worldwide has the maximum expertise on humanitarian hubs. She mentioned that I built up the UNHRD network, 6 humanitarian hubs. All of them are, as we say, having a participation by humanitarian organization only. In UAE, you decide, not me, because I came later on. I was simply a member of the International Humanitarian City in the past, but UAE decided to create this city by collocating together both elements, the humanitarians and the manufacturer. And this is where we have to continue, most probably, if we want to ensure in the future a good supply chain. The fact that the supply chain collapsed, it was unfortunately, and this is something that we have to put and to take into consideration also in the future. When you have hundreds and hundreds of aircraft which are grounded, well, the humanitarians can count only and exclusively on military assets. Those are the only ones that have not been grounded, for sure. Again, if we want to ensure that the supply chain continues to be, let me say, in place, then we have to rethink totally about also the production. Let's just bring, the idea of setting up a humanitarian hub was to bring the humanitarian aid close to the areas of disaster. But we cannot continue to think that we have to bring the humanitarian aids to continue to manufacture, with all of my respect, of course, for the economy of China, but we have to try to get a good production also close to the humanitarian hubs. This is how does it work. Now, the International Humanitarian City, going back to your question on the logistics component, well, this is another good luck, honestly speaking. This country is offering top-class logistics facilities here in Abu Dhabi, in Dubai, ports which are able to serve worldwide, airports, airlines that are serving hundreds of destinations, not only by the national carriers, Emirates and Etihad, but also by many other carriers which are flying in and out. And if you look even the fleets of the aircraft, we are talking about Airbus 380s, we are talking about Boeing 777, and those aircraft have a capacity in the bellies of 30 tons of cargo minimum. So it means that for the humanitarian, this is something that is extremely important. And this is part of, let's say, those tools that really attracted the humanitarian community into UAE. So the logistics infrastructures, there is no doubt about this. So proximity to the manufacturer, proximity, unfortunately, also to that two-thirds of the world population that I mentioned before, which is living and who's living very close to the prone areas. If you look into the Southeast Asia, many of the disasters are happening there. When we talk about tsunami, when we talk about earthquakes, when we talk about volcano eruption, floods, and so on and so on. So that is the point. So there is a very strong infrastructure, and we have to take this opportunity.
You mentioned localizing manufacturing, but that, I think we're assuming that all countries have that ability to localize it, which is not, realistically, it is not true. So do you suggest that we allocate some of the humanitarian fund into strengthening local manufacturers?
Honestly speaking, I would encourage the manufacturers which are seated in China, in Malaysia, in India, and so on, to explore the opportunities in UAE. That's it, because again, whenever there is an emergency, and this is where substantially we crushed our nose during the pandemic, that everybody was flying into China, loading the aircraft, and taking back into the country. I don't intend to mention what used to happen even in China. Somebody's trying to take the cargo of another country and so on, but because that is a sort of desperate action where you need to take from where you have the goods. But for sure, everybody decided to delocalize the production into Southeast Asia. If we were so good, okay, to restart immediately, and most probably through huge costs, to produce again in our areas means that this is possible. Let me give you another data. In 2020, our stock value was really very high. But the same quantity in 2021 was a little bit less. And the only reason was because the costs went really up. And then after 12 months, more or less, started in stabilizing the cost of even the masks or other simple items. This is what's happened when you have, let me say, this kind of emergencies. The same is reflected also in the transport and so on and so on.
Since we're on the topic of logistics, I'd really like to bring attention to the Humanitarian Logistics Data Bank that you have at IHC, which was launched in 2018. I would really like for you to tell us more about it and how did it play, what kind of role did it play during the pandemic, and what role will it continue to play in the future?
Thank you. This is a very good question because I'm extremely proud about this project. Whenever there is an emergency, if you try to put yourself and to sit in the chair of any person having responsibility at national level, to be the head of the civil protection, to be the head of the civil defense, to be the prime minister, whatever you want. And you are in a country affected by a disaster. And you know quite well that your own internal capacity is not enough to cope with such disaster. You need to call for international support. You know what used to happen? You have the prime minister or the head of the civil protection or the head of the civil defense picking up the phone and calling the UN representative, the UN emergency coordinator. Usually this is a diplomat, it's not absolutely a technical person. And the poor guy or the poor lady, whoever is obliged to start calling the various agencies. So let me call World Food Program, let me call the World Health Organization, and so on and so on. Most probably after a week is able to put together a certain number of information and saying, by the way, dear Prime Minister, in those countries are seated some humanitarian stocks and so on and so on. Now, this is something that is quite unacceptable. After a week, you have an idea on where are seated the humanitarian aid, who's holding those humanitarian aid, what are we talking about in terms of materials, in terms of quantities and so on. And what we did is that at Dubai International Humanitarian City, we decided to fill the gap. how to fill this gap? Now, most probably, sorry for mentioning some bizarre words, warehouse management system is a tool that is used in any warehouse. It's going to tell you in a few seconds what exists into that warehouse. But those warehouse management system within IHC means that everybody is using its own warehouse management system. How to solve this? Many years ago, OCHA attempted to create a data bank by asking all the humanitarian organizations to feed the humanitarian data bank with the information. Of course, it was totally outdated. Nobody was feeding the data bank. What we did is, sorry to say that is a very stupid solution that we created. I have to tell you that any line item, under the commercial point of view, has an HS code. My glasses, the mask, my tie, this flag, region flag, everything has an HS code. In the moment that you are going to import and export a line item, is going to pass through customs thanks to an HS code. Any company, including the humanitarians, they have a code company. So, what we did is that my colleagues started in mapping up to 5,000 line items, which are the most used within the humanitarian operations. And together with the customs, they identified the most correct HS code, which means that for any transaction that is going to happen today within the customs, okay, is going to be informed our data bank. So we are not putting, of course, our fingers into the customs system, but are the customs today of Dubai, Panama, Italy, which are pushing all the data into our humanitarian logistics data bank. Whenever you want, you can open the humanitarian logistics data bank even from the IHC website. But what I can tell you is that we populated that humanitarian logistics data bank with all the information related to the past 5 years, since 2017. This is where we started. And today we are able to tell you exactly what left as of today in 2022, which were I don't know, I can tell you just because I have quite a good memory. In 2021, more or less, we did 1,300 dispatches for a total of approximately $140 million, and we served 120 countries. In 2021, it was slightly less, those quantities, in terms of, instead of 1,200, we were talking about over the 1,200 shipments, $120 million, and 111 countries, if I remember correctly. Now, those are all information that are extremely important. Opening, for example, in January or in February this year, our humanitarian logistics data bank was telling us that the main beneficiary country was Afghanistan. In the past few years, have been always Yemen. So it means that we are able to trace even which is the most beneficiary countries, blah, blah. And across the various months, what we noted is that, yes, Afghanistan was still a relevant country to be served, but started in growing Romania, Poland, and so on. So means that the operation related to Ukraine crisis, and of course Yemen. So means that all of those information are extremely important, and you can catch it today quite easily. If you look even, you can get the top 5, the top 10 line items that have been dispatched, and is going to tell you clearly if, for example, the COVID-19 pandemic is still, let me say, there is still a request of assistance or not. So everything is a very rich type of information, and I can imagine for you that you are doing research, how relevant it is. And let me conclude this. We are, and we intend to extend and to continue to do agreements with customs of those countries that I mentioned before, which means that starting from Australia, because there is a humanitarian hub in Brisbane, then there is another one in Malaysia, in Kuala Lumpur, are two in reality, one in the port and the other one in the airport. There is one in China, but is still pending because there is no formalization. Then we have Dubai. Then we have one in Jordan. There is another one in Kenya, Cameroon, and Ghana, Italy, Canary Islands in Spain, and Panama. So all of those we intend to bring under the same humanitarian logistics data bank. During the Expo, I was invited for a conference, and I met incidentally a young entrepreneur, Nibble. And this guy, we were talking, waiting, to start the conference. And I was explaining him about the humanitarian logistics data bank. This guy came out, well, what are you waiting to apply the artificial intelligence? I said, wow, what? So why I'm telling you this? This is another example exactly how the private sector is helping us. Again, this is a very young company. And when I asked him why you are doing it for us, because of course this is something that is doing free of charge. You know which is the answer of this guy? He told me, listen, I had the good luck of coming into Dubai as a young entrepreneur. I have been supported by the government. I have to give back something to this country. You are giving me the opportunity. I said, wow. Honestly speaking, what I can tell you, God bless you guys. That is the point. So, again, just to tell you, I'm not knocking anymore the doors of the private sector. The private sector is coming along, want to be part of the humanitarian action, want to be part of the humanitarian field, and it's just, and again, for me, this is the results of the COVID-19 pandemic. We have to take care about each other. That is the message that I'm receiving. And honestly, this is the message of the World Humanitarian Day that we got from the Secretary General in proposing as a topic exactly how we can take care, and we are the first that we can save lives.
Thank you, Mr. Saba. And although things are still looking grim for the world, but with that message, I think we can continue with a bit of hope. And with that, I open the floor for any questions.
Hi, thank you, Mr. Saba, for your enlightening discussion. My question is very general. Speaking about the pandemic or not, but what is the criteria or underlying principles in providing humanitarian aid? And in other words, when do you know when to take a step in and take actions, and when Do you leave it solely in the government's hands?
What is driving the humanitarian action is quite simple. Here you have the father of the country who teaches us quite a lot. Humanitarian action is done regardless my skin color, my religion, my culture. Let me say that here we have something that we learn extremely well. And this is not absolutely property of somebody in particular. This is our heritage for everybody. So there is no borders for the humanitarian action. And yes, we have some risks, there is no doubt. But this is what is driving us. And this is what should drive the humanitarian action. It's, we are talking about solidarity. We are talking about humanity. Well, apart this, for sure, again, if we are able to take simple lessons learned from the COVID-19 pandemic, we need to focus again and to refocus, but all together, especially when we talk about sustainability. We embraced within IHC the goal number 17, the partnership, because we are conscious that this is something that we cannot do alone. We need to do it together. And again, we should work together, but delivering always as one, because this is what we have in front of us, is always the same beneficiary. Honestly speaking, this is my only consideration that I can give you. But I'm pretty sure that any humanitarian organization is following exactly the same principle of humanity, solidarity, impartiality, and so on.
Any more questions?
Thank you, Mr. Saba, for the presentation and lecture. I just wanted to ask about when you touched on the topic of private sector being directly invested or involved in the humanitarian action. Can you please expand your view on that, and what changes has it made on IHC? And is it on the local and or international level?
Well, when I talk about private sector, I was referring about the experience that we accrued within the International Humanitarian City. And again, all the companies that touched base with us, okay, we are getting for sure a support which is not, for example, just a free flight or a discount in the transport or something. No, we have something more. What we are getting from them is their own experience in helping us, for example, on the logistics component, helping us, for example, also on procedures component. That is the reason why I mentioned, for example, the academic institutions, but as well as the last example that I gave you in applying the artificial intelligence. And this is something that came alone. This is something that is going to support tremendously us, especially in somehow not predicting the emergency, but predicting, for example, the movement of the humanitarian aid and so on. For sure, the private sector changed totally the approach. You know very well, in Europe or in the United States, a company that is going to make the cash contribution is going to use that cash contribution for reducing the taxes. That is something that is allowed almost by many of the laws. Now, you know very well that if you do the same in UAE, these have a total different flavor as far as concern me, because there is nothing to deduct, but your gesture is clearly as a clear message. Now, here I'm talking about knowledge. Sometimes I'm talking about even, let me say, financial support, more in kind support, and so on and so on. So my interpretation is the private sector wants to be a very proactive partner within the humanitarian field. I can tell you the humanitarian field is populated by the United Nations professional people. It's populated by international organizations such as the Federation of the Red Cross or the Red Crescent Society, or can be populated by many government entities and so on, by missionaries, by foundations, philanthropists, and so on and so on. Well, the private sector decided to not be less. At international level, I can tell you that is happening almost the same. This morning, I was showing to my colleagues a letter which I received from World Food Program. I was just in copy addressed to the big boss of the DP World. World Food Program was thanking DP World because they got a very strong support in the port of Constanta in Romania for the operation of movement of food related to the, let me say, Ukrainian crisis. So again, I'm talking about private sector. The private sector is supporting almost everywhere. It's not something that happened. I register, of course, I'm the witness of what is happening in Dubai, but I'm sure that the same is happening also in other countries.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for your questions. And with that, we can conclude. Mr. Saba, that was very insightful. And like my colleague mentioned, it was very enlightening and illuminating. But most importantly, it was very, very hopeful, realistically hopeful. So thank you so much for today. And thank you for being here with us.
Thank you so much. Can I express can I pass a message to you? Whenever you want, you can contact me directly or Anand. If you can jump into IHC and organize a visit, it could be extremely interesting. Then you are going to touch exactly with your end the Humanitarian Logistics Data Bank. You can touch with your end what is a humanitarian aid. There is quite a lot. You are really, I would appreciate if you could visit us. It has been a pleasure, of course, to come into Trends today, but I would appreciate your visit. I'm pretty sure also for Anand, it will be another good opportunity for meeting you again.
We would be honored, and I'm sure we will take your offer. So thank you.
Thanks again. Thanks a lot.